We can move. All right. Fantastic. We'll call the workshop planning meeting to order at 6 o'clock, Signal Mountain workshop. This is September. We missed our regular. We elected to forego our.
There was no new business.
In order to address this very important meeting. And it appears that staff has. Oh, I can't hear anything. I'm not doing this thing. Turn it off. All right. So staff has both addressed concerns that we've discussed the past few months and modified tables as applicable within the sections for the topic that was brought to us initially from BZA that had to do with infill lots. So the suggestion was, and draft language states, that we can eliminate, let's see. Did you send us previous language and draft language, or? This is the language from previous meeting. Language from the previous meeting. Okay, so I still see infill lot in the subnote, and that'll be probably, I might assume, most of the work. But of most distinction, are there no speakers in here? Yeah, so that's much louder, huh? Everybody pretty tickled about that? Very good. So of most concern was the position that I promoted last time from the Georgia considerations that we made, was to change minimum lot size in conventional subdivisions, to return those to an acre, and allow a mechanism for developing anything smaller of that, either being by an existing lot of record or through a zoning appeal application. So the premise being that the way that we believe that we work is to set a target nearest to what we would like to be the outcome, and then there be a legal recourse for a property owner to achieve smaller developments, either by previous lots of record, standing lots of record, or by zoning appeal if they needed to. But as we were having a half, or even as Hamilton County did with a quarter acre, anything that came in as a quarter acre from a planning standpoint, provided zoning was met, we have found ourselves many times over in a position where we had really no control, even when we had a lot of reservations about that being the case. So I'm going to let Garrett kind of tee us up. Then we'll start some discussion, and we'll see just how long something like this takes to discuss and come to a consensus on, if at all.
Sure. So, I mean, you clarified pretty much exactly what we talked about last time. Essentially removing the minor subdivision language from the zoning ordinance, and then revising the language or removing the language for an infill lot, essentially solving that question as well. So the issue that stood out to me from July, I believe it was the reduction, or the setback reduction for small lots of record. Everybody remember discussing that? Mm-hmm. And so essentially increasing the minimum lot size in these residential districts, it would doubly reduce the setback requirement. Did I say that correct, Boyd? Essentially increasing the lot size from a half acre to 1 acre, it doubly reduces the minimum setback for small lots of record. Is that correct?
It could. The way it was before, the reductions for small lot of record based on half acre lots. So if the lot size increases to an acre, that would make the reductions far more significant. So we need to be sure to address that. Make sure that there's a minimum, the true minimum setback requirements for small lot of record, or
which that would take an amendment to section 817, which addresses small lots of records, which is not in this ordinance. So I could draft that language, bring it back to the next planning commission meeting, and go from there.
And that also includes irregular lots, correct?
Would it define a
No,
regular?
I'm just saying an irregular lot versus a traditional lot.
Define irregular, sorry.
A hexagon type lot. I'm just using that as an example where you've got one that's not a traditional square or traditional. I'm just saying there may be irregular lots that come up. I'm not saying we want to go down that road and ensure that language is embedded. We might want to talk about it.
Sure. I mean, right now, I think we're just talking about the actual size.
Nope,
and
I got it.
The acreage
Yeah.
of the lot.
Yep.
Could you repeat that proposed language one more time?
Pardon me?
Could you repeat that proposed language one more time for addressing small lots of record?
Right, so that would take amending section 817, which I had it pulled up, just 1 second.
Garrett, it may behoove us just to go back and take 2 minutes to review what we talked about the last time. I guess it would have been the August meeting, correct?
Yes.
Just to follow up to the point of where we're at.
Right, so essentially it was, what Jamie had brought up is the small infill lots that come in, they were carving out small half acres, which they could do legally, and to amend, to kind of curb developers from coming into Signal Mountain and taking half acre lots out of larger tracts of land, developing as much as possible. It was proposed to increase the minimum lot size from a half acre all the way up to an acre. That's kind of where we are with this ordinance. And so in doing so, that directly affects section 817 of the zoning ordinance, which addresses small lots of record, which bases the setbacks off of a ratio of the minimum lot size to the actual current lot size. So that's kind of where we're coming at with this right here. This is what we found that what our previous ordinance last month indirectly affects.
Correct. But what is the proposed change in language to help address that?
To address section 817, to actually set a minimum setback requirement or increase the formula, or put a formula in there for reduction, setback reduction for small lots of records. That makes sense?
But to clarify, that actual language has not been drafted.
Correct.
Okay. What's the thinking in terms of those two options, pros and cons? Setting a minimum or some type of calculated?
I mean, it makes sense to set an absolute minimum setback reduction.
I think we talked about that at the last meeting.
Right. Yeah, that was brought up at the very end,
Yeah.
kind of before we set up a workshop to discuss it.
Yeah, and hope the mechanical means that I hope that we would consider small lot of record based on some of town manager's suggestions is to actually actively pull data from GIS, see what the smallest lot is, right? Tabulate what those setbacks then would be prorated based on their size from this new language of a 1 acre lot, and then kind of extrapolate from there generally what we'd be looking at. Because if it was a 1 acre and say there's a 10th acre lot of record, if it's a 50-foot front setback, now we're at 5. So that may be undesirable and something we have to address. If it doesn't exist physically in the GIS, in the current parcel delineation, then we don't have it to worry about. But it should be checked. That was what I was hoping the workshop is not only do we say an idea that comes to our head, but we actually dig far enough to validate it, test it with the information that we have available.
And that would be the approach on the ratio approach. To say, is a ratio approach even a problem? We're saying that potentially it is, but your point is we can go look to see, do we really think it is a problem?
Yeah, that's
And then also look at setting a minimum and what would that mean to the smallest lot of record?
yeah. So within the contention of what early discussions of what is an infill lot, what is a subdivision in a subdivision? Is that a lot that we draw a line in and now that's a subdivision, so we've got a subdivided parcel within a subdivision?
Right.
I argued not really. There was some language, I'm talking mostly to Charlie because that's where there was a fair amount of back and forth, but there was, a subdivision, a named subdivision, Burnham Wood, versus Billy's house that he's going to turn into 3 houses.
Right.
Technically is a subdivision, and we've changed a little bit of the subdivision sequencing and scheduling language, but we still have, kind of the platting requirements, and those are loosely dependent on some of the language. And I see that we still have infill lot for minor subdivisions being developed within an existing subdivision. What is existing? What is a subdivision? What is an infill lot? Still needs to be defined. So that's the biggest, that's the biggest portion of work that we have to work through.
Mhm.
Small lots of record, 817, if a lot of record is smaller than the current minimum lot size in the district, ratio of the lot in square feet to the minimum lot size shall be determined. That same ratio, or the same ratio, will be used to determine setbacks for the small lot of record.
Mhm.
So we already have language for small lots of record. We can test it based on language that we generate from 603 and 614. But they're certainly relative. They may or may not be relevant. I think we address 603 first, test 817, and then see whether or not we have an issue to address there as well. But I see the priority tonight being mostly the footnote to table 6030202.
That was our original issue.
The original issue, yeah. And the biggest change far and away, I mean, our adjoining areas are reducing lot size. We are increasing lot size, specifically from one point of a recent submittal in the effect of trying to make some kind of stopgap, but understand there's still a mechanism whereby somebody could still take a Georgia example, apply through BZA to subdivide it separately. That's the purpose of that board. Whether or not we think it's likely or not at this point is maybe a personal opinion, but if I understand it right, that is the function of that commission, to take on appeals like that from planning commission and be granted other property rights that aren't expressly allowed in the zoning ordinance.
You're looking at me.
Yeah, does town staff also agree that that's a possibility for a property owner?
It's possible, but I think the latitude of the BZA is restricted to scenarios where there's a demonstrated hardship. And simply not having enough land to do what you want to do, and wanting to be able to divide it into smaller than the minimum size, I think it might be difficult to demonstrate. And it's unlikely that someone can demonstrate a hardship that would justify it. So technically, yes, but practically, probably not. If you're asking my opinion.
I think that's what we're going for. I mean, it would be exceptional circumstances to have something smaller than the current new minimum lot size.
Of a half an acre,
So it'll be an
Of an
acre.
or the full acre.
Right.
Mhm.
That's the minimum lot size for conventional subdivisions, and then minor subdivisions used to allow for a half an acre, but now we've taken that out. So if the minor subdivision takes
Okay.
place, it's going to be an acre. And then if somebody has some sort of extraordinary circumstance that they need it to be smaller than an acre, that's when they would go to the BZA and find out if they meet their criteria.
What's the number of parcels that constitutes a minor subdivision?
2, right?
And that's defined by,
It's not really defined. I think that's could be a point of discussion. I don't believe that there is a definition in the definition section for minor subdivision, is there?
Right, not in the zoning ordinance, but in the subdivision regulations, I believe it's 4 lots.
Okay.
So in the subdivision regs, it's 4
Right,
lots.
yeah, we're not removing it.
It's four lots, but also that does not meet criteria for major subdivision in that there's infrastructure associated with it. I don't remember the exact word. There's no roads, nothing like that.
Essentially 4 lots, you can submit a preliminary and a final plat combined to the planning commission. Anything over that requires a preliminary and plat first. That makes sense? So a minor subdivision, in this case,
Is it,
It
it's
would be
4
two.
or
But
fewer?
I mean, if you're taking one lot and turning it into 2, what do you call that?
minor.
But it's not 4 lots.
So a minor could be 2 lots,
Oh, 4 lots.
but a minor subdivision, 2 lots or less could be staff approved. That might be some confusion there.
Okay,
Like,
Now-
sorry to bring up Georgia again, but that was 2 lots. That could have been staff approved as well, had there not been so many issues with it.
exactly, yeah. So we're taking out the references to minor subdivisions here, but they still remain in the subdivision regulation. I noticed in this, it didn't really, there were some places above and below the charts that had the words minor subdivision in them, that this didn't remove that.
Right, so I mean, I guess to address that off the bat, this was more of a discussion. This was a drafted ordinance just to bring up the discussion of this. It wasn't, compensation.
Okay,
Here's what you should be adopting tonight. We'll just get a discussion.
okay, all right.
The actual language in the subdivision regs that this is some of the, what are loose ends in my head that I thought I wanted to dress up here. Do the zoning ordinances adequately reference the subdivision regulation definitions where applicable? Is it the sentence like that in zoning? Because if we don't have a definition for minor subdivision in zoning, through what metric are they required to use the minor subdivision definition in the subdivision regs?
You're saying you'd like to have it defined, and you'd like to have minor subdivision firmly defined in the zoning ordinance, is that correct?
No, generally I don't like duplicating, because then you got to change 2 things at once if you ever change it. I'd rather reference it. So I mean, for instance, if we're going to keep the words minor subdivision under the table 603, I'd want to say as defined in the Signal Mountain subdivision regs 2-101.302.
That's 4 or less.
But I think we're
That's 4
keeping,
or less.
I think we're taking that language out, aren't we?
It's not currently out. We've got to discuss that.
Oh, that's what, yeah, it was, on the first page, section 2 says to remove that language.
And I'll restate this several times, but where this happened a year ago roughly was that this bullet was contentiously debated at BZA, and they asked us to consider reviewing the language to make it as clear as possible, as they did not feel they had adequate guidance of what was a minor subdivision and what constituted an infill lot. So definitions were important. We brought in existing planning commission members that discussed conservation, subdivision methodology that they went through to develop that language. That's where this table was amended, this 213-18 in September 2013. That's when that bullet was added. If I remember correctly, it seemed like we had 2 representatives and they each had an opinion on either side of the debate, as Charlie and I still contend, I might guess. And so that was our task. Is it unclear How are we certain that it's unclear? Are we in consensus of what it means? If not, is there language we should add, or should we reference some other section of language to show it? Currently, Signal Mountain only defines minor subdivision in the subdivision regulations. And so long as the zoning ordinance says for any language regarding subdivision regulations, refer to definitions in the subdivision regulations, then we're fine, right? If that doesn't happen, then there's an opportunity for ambiguity. So section 2, 101 through 02, minor subdivision, currently in the subdivision reg says a minor subdivision is a division of land into 5 or fewer lots where the conditions for major subdivision review, so it's a review trigger, as set out in subsection just above, major subdivision, are not present. And a major says a division of land into 2 or more. So we got overlap, but it's pretty expanded. 2 or more lots that include any of the following: a new or extended street, right of way, not including future alignments on the plat, improvements within an existing street right of way, other than repair or construction of sidewalks or pedestrian amenities, hydrants, or minor improvements, future public school site, park site, or open space, dedication of a right of way, and dedications, reservations, improvements, or environmental conditions that, in the opinion of the town manager or his or her appointed agent, require construction documents to be reviewed prior to final plat approval. So any of those conditions, 2 or more, is major, and it tends to focus mostly around new rights of way and new obligations for the city to maintain work. Minor, where that's not the case, is 5 or fewer.
5 or fewer.
Division of land into 5 or fewer lots where the major conditions review are not present.
I think it was fewer than 5.
Yeah.
Right, this proposal takes out that language regarding minor subdivisions and infill lots. So if that's taken out, we don't have a reference to minor subdivisions.
Okay, am I reading that right? So section 2, remove the following language under the dimensional reg tables found in section 6030202. It is removing the footnote.
Yes.
Okay.
Which also removes the language of the ambiguity of what is an existing subdivision. I feel like that was an issue as well. Nobody could clearly define what an existing subdivision was.
That's right.
So in other words, if if there is some infill lot somewhere that's being developed, they will use the setbacks that are in this table, and they won't use the most frequently occurring setbacks in the neighborhood or in the street. Okay.
Yeah, if they're an acre or more, they'll use whatever's in the table. If it's a small lot of record, then it'll be that's over here.
But if somebody, had a situation where their setback would place them in an awkward position compared to everybody else on the street, they really could go to the BZA and say, can we change the setbacks to match everybody else? And the BZA can call that an extraordinary circumstance and grant that waiver if they wish to do so. That solves the issue from the BZA.
Would that be considered a hardship though? Isn't that what you were saying before?
You're saying the reasoning for the hardship would be to go seek approval from the BZA?
Well, he was saying that they could apply before the BCA to get the same setback as everybody else. He said you had to show hardship.
I think if in terms of scenario, there's an adverse effect having to meet a setback that the properties around you did not have to meet, and I could see them arguing that would be a hardship. My argument, as I stated before, was based on wanting to subdivide the property and get a lot smaller than what the minimum is.
No.
That I would have a hard time
Right.
imagining the hardship associated with this, because the lot is there and meeting current setback is different from everybody around you, placing your property in adverse condition. I think you already authority.
So I think an example maybe to discuss is, say for instance, you have exactly 2 acres that would then meet a minor subdivision here. It'd still fall within a conventional subdivision. So you would have 2 1-acre lots, but a hardship might be that everybody on the street is 20 feet off the street and these setbacks are 40. They could then apply to move their house forward to be within the front setback in order to meet what was adjoining. They might also need to, if they had 190 feet of street frontage, so they were just under the 100 required, but they still met the 1 acre for the size of the lot, but based on how it was situated, they might still apply and need a variance to develop both lots, even though we could subdivide it, but they would have a harder time building on it because they didn't meet the full conventional subdivision dimensional requirements.
And another thing this change would do is provide some latitude, because before it said they shall use that setback. So in this case, if they were fine with the 40-foot setback, they could use it. If they wanted to be more consistent with the property around them, then they would have an avenue for seeking that.
No.
And staff can make that determination if it's splitting it down into 2, correct? Or a request for a single parcel to go down into 2 lots, right?
Yeah, those are all reviewed. They don't meet the minimum standards, then we basically would deny it, move forward with
Right.
the DBA.
You know, the appeal of this gives latitude to do what makes sense, and we also don't have folks tied up in trying to determine what is the most frequently occurring front setback on the street. We had some examples early on talking about that could be a complicated determination. How far do you go to do that? So that's another appeal here, is it eliminates some complexity that doesn't need to exist. And to that point, that you can just follow it, or you can do something that makes some sense. And I don't on the surface see how it could be abused. You know, a lot of times when you provide latitude, it can be abused, but I don't on the surface necessarily see that. Something to the detriment of the city.
I don't know, what I struggle with most is when this conversation came up, and we've had some we won't say emotional, we had some fairly strong opinions about members, and some of which are no longer even on the board as a result of it. If we wanted to take a popular political filter, you know, you're going, this is a fairly polar discussion. You're going to make a lot of people who live here very happy about significantly reducing the availability of development within already developed areas, and you're going to put a pretty significant burden on people developing in much larger tracts still within Signal Mountain, but outside of Old Town or near Palisades. And so I think it's going to be a fairly polar decision to like increase the lot size, but there is still the opportunity to push, you know, those parcels of 10, 15, 50 acres or greater. It's going to push them towards conservation subdivisions, which allows them really increase the density over the minor subdivision, right? this is going to really disrupt anyone who is currently living on 2 acres or more, or less than 5, that wants to buy a house, break it up, sell the lots off, invest in the property and move on. Those types of investors, for those people who've lived here for some period of time, knew that they had this opportunity in their backyard to do a front yard cutout, as it was referred to in an earlier meeting, and then significantly benefit from, the land prices, and then move on. I hope that that's what we're circumventing, more than really stifling what most of the home builders associations would say we're stabbing ourselves in the back here by reducing the amount of density that could be constructed on. And I'll keep saying that, Chattanooga's, of course, they implemented the slope ordinance and are implementing a lot of stream buffers. So they're keeping you out of streams and keeping you off of rocky faces, but they're also, in doing so, allowing you to build on 1/4 acre lots. They went from halves to quarters. We're going from halves to wholes. So we're going in the opposite direction of our neighbors.
And
Well, I mean, I don't want it to be a knee-jerk reaction to one particular application that really kind of got us riled up. So, there is data presented here on, lot sizes that live within the town.
Well, I mean,
there's 26
just to
lots.
that point,
Look in
Let
the
me ask-
BZA meeting, right? Can you give us some context of what this is?
Well, we have a BZA representative from council right here.
Charlotte.
yeah. Well, one thing I would say is that it's creating consistency. It's really
Well, it's removing ambiguity.
right. I
Is
mean,
what it does.
why should we tell one person who's got 20 acres that if you want to develop as a conventional subdivision, each lot has to be an acre, and then one person who's got 2 acres and tell them you can create 4 half-acre lots out of that? That's not consistent. So we're creating consistency by taking out that minor subdivision that allows people to have a smaller lot size than we generally say we want. So that's a positive and a good thing. But what was your question about the BZA?
Just some context around the contention over this, that previously, a year ago, that Jamie was talking about?
Well, there's 2 BZA issues that were contentious. One was a lot, it turned out actually not to really be a big difference, but the BZA had denied somebody a setback, a certain setback that they wanted, a reduced setback. And then that person went to the town manager and said, well, there's a provision here that says that you can use the most frequently occurring front setback, so we want you to give us the most frequently occurring front setback. And the town manager consulted with our attorney and said, I should do that. And the language as written says he was required to do that.
Right.
And so he did, and gave them a slightly different setback than what the BZA had come up with.
2-foot difference, right?
They had requested, just what was it was significant.
Yeah.
They requested a significant reduction. When they asked me about this, they said, so we looked at this, and these houses next to us are this, so that's what we want. And I said, no, that's not what this says, but what it says you are entitled to, and to your question earlier, literally every house that had a North Palisades Drive address got measured. And the most commonly occurring setback was 39 feet instead of 40 feet, and they got a 1-foot reduction.
Yeah.
And some people were upset about that.
Well, I think it was not upset that they got a 1-foot reduction, and I think it was more upset about the process and how things came about. But what it also led to a discussion of was that this seems complicated to apply, and what is a subdivision, or what is a existing subdivision, and I don't even think an infill lot was defined, and so it seems probably better to take it out and allow for an appeal to the BZA to get a different setback if you need one. I mean, you know, you might have an infill lot in Old Town where all the houses, and there's areas in Old Town that are small lots, you know, streets that are small lots, and all the houses might be, you know, a certain distance from the street because they were all built around the same time, and then there's some infill lot, somebody built the house, and it's 40 feet setback now, so everybody's here, and then you go back, and then people may not like that either. That would be permissible now if we take this language out. Alternatively, if somebody saw that every one of their neighbors was the same distance, but they're now having to go back 40 feet, then they may petition the BZA and say, we want to be consistent with our neighbors, and the BZA may find that there's a hardship to require them to be further back. Either of those two options can take place.
Thank you.
And now, I don't know if we've exhausted our discussion on that topic. My only recommendation, if we're going to take these references to the minor subdivisions out, is to go ahead and clean up like this one where it says right above it, for the maximum number of lots in a minor subdivision, multiply the base number of lots by a density factor of 1. Well, if we've taken out minor subdivisions in that chart, then we don't even need that language either. So that would be my only suggestion if we're going to do this, is to clean up a couple of areas where that exists.
How many times does minor subdivision show up in the zoning ordinance? Seven times. So Charlie's right, it does show up in front of table 6030202. And as we have shown, we start with the table, so that would need to be modified as well. It shows up in the table, shows up in the footnote that we're removing. And also 6030203, section 3, you've got that to say, include the following language, 603. Maybe we don't. So there's another reference to minor subdivisions in 6030203, the dimensional regulations for minors, as shown in section 30202, which is a table, shall be used for plan 17 to determine required setbacks for existing small lots of record. So that statement would have to be removed as well. Next time it shows up is 61403, as you have shown. There is a sentence, 61403(2)(c). For the maximum number of lots in minor, multiply the base number of lots by a density factor of 1. That would have to be modified. 6th time is the table, 7th is the footnote. So you've got the table and footnote in each. We just have that other sentence to remove as well, because there's no longer a table reference for what a minor subdivision is. Just taking that note. Are you noting that, highlighting it, something? All right.
Can we go to 817
Sure.
for a moment?
You want to test 817 before we get real certain on 603 and 614? I think that's a good idea.
I just wanted to make a comment about 817.
Okay.
So that language says, if a lot of record is smaller than the current minimum lot size in the district, the ratio, et cetera, et cetera. The minimum lot size, there's 2 of them.
Yeah, it's a conservation size. Is
That's
the
only a
minimum
quarter
lot
of an
size.
acre. I mean, so what is the minimum lot size?
I'm pretty sure 817 predates the
Oh, yeah,
conservation subdivision.
sure it does.
So it's always been applied to the conventional. And
But wouldn't,
Well, you
Did-
actually had you read something where it talked about for 817, you used the minor subdivision.
Mhm.
yeah, so let's get back to that
So if we're taking
statement.
that out, we definitely need to fix this, because then we don't really know what.
I think that's in 603. I'll go back up again. Okay, 603, 0203 states the dimensional regulations for minors, as shown in section 603, 0202, shall be used for applying section 817 to determine required setbacks for the existing small lots of record.
So if you remove that section, then you've thrown it back to determine what is the minimum lot size. And if you said that, you could say the minimum lot size is,
Well, we could keep it the same, I think, is if your idea was where I was assuming you were going, if we said the dimensional regulations for the current minimum lot size in the district, as shown in 603, 0202, which would then lead to conservation, right? Then you could leave this the same.
yeah, I mean, if that's,
the only time you would get a reduction is if you go a lot less than a quarter of an acre.
right.
Anytime you would get a reduction based on this prorating in the small lot of record language would be if your lot was 10,890 square feet.
Or less.
Or
Well,
less.
than
Or
that.
less.
Which is a quarter.
Right, which is a quarter of an acre.
Mm.
So your lot would have to be less than a quarter of an acre to have a different setback.
So
Mhm.
we do need to change the language for both sections.
Right, I mean, we need to decide, like, how low can you go? Because if you have a quarter acre lot, your front setback is gonna be the same as the conventional lot, 40 feet. And if we want it to be,
Well, divided by 4. Be 10
no,
feet.
no,
You're
not
gonna have
right
to maintain
now.
that
If we
same
take that
ratio.
language out, then it's, the current minimum lot size, you gotta be smaller than a quarter of an acre, because the current minimum lot size, if we take out the subdivision, the minor subdivision, is 10,890 feet.
I agree with you. This would read to me, a lot of record are smaller than the current minimum lot size, which would then be the conservation lot.
Right.
Which means.
It would have to be smaller than a quarter acre, yeah.
Mhm.
So that's not right.
That would be the issue. And again, technically, that is what it says, but this existed when there wasn't a conservation subdivision, so it's always been applied to the conventional minimum. So that's something that perhaps needs to be clear, but looking at this, could we not just say that, as we discussed earlier, different ways to approach it, but set the setback, the minimum setbacks for conservation subdivision as the absolute minimum.
Right, I think
Despite the lot size.
Right, if you have a small lot of record that is below the conventional minimum lot size for conventional subdivision, you get this reduction provided that in no circumstance will it be reduced below. And then,
Yeah, so that's two bounds. You could bound 817 by simply changing current minimum to conventional subdivision,
No,
right?
if you do that, well, I think Boyd's point is well taken, yes. If you say, which you should say, like he said, current minimum lot size for conventional subdivisions. So
Yes.
then we've set the current minimum lot size is an acre.
That's the top bound.
And so then we've decided that if you have a quarter-acre lot, then the ratio might be too much. Like it's gonna be 10 feet.
10
It'll
feet
be
instead
a
of 20,
fourth
yeah.
Of a quarter of a 40. So then we're saying, but no less than the minimum setbacks for conservation.
Okay.
So then we've changed it two ways.
I agree that's the intent. Let's decide what's the clearest way to say that. Well, I agree that's the intent. Does anyone else have an opinion about it?
I agree. I think that does what we want to
Okay.
do.
So we're gonna bound it between, if you're above an acre, you're conventional.
Mhm.
If you're below an acre but greater than a quarter, you're prorated.
Conservation.
If you're at a quarter or below lot of record, then you meet the conservation requirements.
Yeah.
Does that need a table, or can we just state that in body text?
No, I think you can state that easily in the body, just as.
Yeah,
I think you
it's
can
pretty
say it. I think you
straightforward.
just- I think you can say it.
Okay,
The clearer that you communicate it, the less issue you're gonna have going forward.
well, there's almost certainly gonna be an issue.
There'll always be an
Sometimes,
issue, but at least if
right.
we've got to Boyd's point, if it can't fall below the minimum, then
Yeah.
there's no ambiguity. You don't go past.
You're giving some latitude for smaller lots, but you're setting an absolute basement on, you can't get.
You can't
Okay.
go past this.
If you
No.
need more than this, there has to be a hardship that you can demonstrate to be the.
Okay. So we can build a little Excel table and test a few of these just to make sure that that works, right?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's a matter of if we can identify, I think we may already have. I'll go back and look from prior discussions when we were considering changing minimum lot size to quarter acre if, this doesn't quite lack. I think we do have a map that shows actual lot sizes down to like quarter acre, half acre, three-quarter acre, and all that.
Yeah.
So if we know how many of those there are, then you can run a million different scenarios, but
Let's run it.
do the math on quarter acre and a third of an acre and run the logical ones, and you have an illustration of what the effect is. I don't think you have to get that deep dive to know how it will work.
I don't think that dives too deep. No, that's not right either.
Are you running a scenario right now?
Mm-hmm. That ain't a whole bunch of reduction. I don't think that's right. Talk amongst yourselves. I'm interested in this.
Right now, anything above a half an acre doesn't get a reduction. Period. Right now, a quarter acre lot would have a 20-foot front setback, 7.5 side, and 12.5 rear. If we do this, they'll have the same 20-foot front, but the side will be 10 instead of 7.5. And the rear will be 25 instead of 12. The rear doesn't change. So it diminishes the benefit some, especially for the rear. But it's fairly close. It's the same in the front, 2.5 feet different on
On a quarter of an acre
There.
or less.
Quarter acre lot. That's how much it would change it over what they get now.
All right. Does this sound all right? So an acre is 40 feet. If you had 40,000 square feet, that'd be 36.7 is your front setback, right? You get to be closer.
Say that again.
So 43,560 is a 40-foot setback. If you have 40,000 square feet lot, you have a 36.7 foot setback.
Who can do that in their head? Go.
If you have, so what I did was I divide the lot
40 by
size
43.
by the acre lot size to get a percentage,
Right.
and then I'm multiplying the front setback by that percentage reduction. So it's 92% of 40 feet on the front setback, so you're at 36. The point is, it gets close to 20 pretty quick. 35,000 square feet is 32 feet front setback, 30,000 square feet, so 3/4 acre is a 27-foot setback, right?
You know, this kind of brings up what I had talked about, that do we need to actually disengage 817 from this chart and just say the lots of record, existing lots of record of less than a half acre? Here's what you did.
So that would
Because
force,
otherwise, we're now allowing reduction in setback on properties that before did not qualify.
They didn't qualify.
well, that's because your convention was to use a major subdivision requirements and not necessarily refer to what we've both interpreted to be the current minimum lot size, which would include conservation and minors.
I think what Boyd's saying is that before, if you had a half acre lot, there was no reduction in lot size,
Right.
or in the setbacks. Okay, anything less than
Well,
a half.
it was-
between
if you had
quarter
an
and a
a-
half, you'd get a reduction.
No, he said a half acre or greater.
Yeah, if you had a
So
half
that
acre, it was in the
metric-
table.
But your 8% wouldn't apply. So you
No.
go all the way down to
But
21,000.
you measured small lots of record by the former minimum lot size, which was a half an acre for minor subdivision.
Right, so you
if
would
you had
meet
a
the
half an
minor.
acre
Yeah.
already, that might be a small lot of record, but you got no change in setbacks because you were the same as the minimum.
That's right, you get a benefit with a small lot of record with the language that we're discussing currently.
Does what we consider a small lot of record change?
Oh,
Because about what you're saying is if it's less than an acre.
Then it
it's
qualifies
a
for
small lot of
reduction.
record.
that's right.
And that's,
That's not the
I don't
case.
think that's what, so
Well-
that's what I'm saying, just completely detach it from this and specifically say, there's an existing lot of record of less than a half acre, then here's what you do. Because otherwise, we're gonna be allowing reductions that never would have been allowed before.
What is that?
So in your scenario, the front would be 20, the side would be 7.5, and the rear is 25, in what you're proposing.
Right, but from what Jamie's saying, if you had a 3/4 of an acre lot,
Mm-hmm.
you can get a reduction.
You got a 27.5 foot front setback.
Yeah, I don't like that.
That's
It's gotta be 40, if you're at that,
Mhm.
if you're at that number, you need 40 feet.
restrict the potential for reduction, half acre or less,
Mhm.
and then there's no negative impact.
That maintains you where
And
you were.
Oh, Lord.
You're actually reducing how much of a reduction.
So then what is the setback on a 3/4 acre lot that's not covered in our table?
It's the same as.
It's the same.
Mhm.
It'd be 40, 20, 10, and 25.
It's, yeah, it's the
Are
same.
you
You
gonna-
don't, you don't wanna monkey with those, a half acre or above. Why would you change that?
And mechanically, I'm not arguing for or against more or less setbacks. I'm only wanting to clarify, how do you say it and where? So where would you put that language here?
Right there.
You'd put it here in 817.
You could do-
Setback from small lot of record, that you specify what a small lot of record
Yeah.
is.
Okay,
On any existing lot of record or less, is what you do.
Okay,
So you could start that by saying, a small lot of record is, and then give your definition, and then go on and say what your setbacks are.
So square foot of 21,780 or less, that's a half acre, right? Take that number, and then you go south of
let me get down.
that. Chuck, you good with that? You'd want the lots bigger?
He doesn't want the reductions at all.
No, I agree, yeah, but Boyd, I like your suggestion where you're saying on a half acre or less, it's 7.5 and 25 feet on rear. And it can't deviate from that.
So let me type down what we're proposing, so we can start poking holes in it, okay? If we're okay with that? Okay.
There's no,
If a lot of record is smaller than what? Because you don't want to say the current, the current minimum lot size for a conventional subdivision?
If an existing lot of record is less than quarter of an acre, or if you want to put it in square feet,
I think acre's fine.
We could make this super easy and just say,
yeah,
we could make it super easy and say that a small lot of record is this. It could be a quarter, a third, whatever. And anything above it, you have the same things as the conventional, and anything below it, you have the same thing as a conservation. And that makes it easy for Chuck. It's gonna be, you don't have to do math.
Okay,
or
well, if
ratios.
a lot
Just
of
say if
record,
it's gonna be, if it's above X square footage, then you go by conventional, and if it's below, at or below X square footage, you go by conservation.
so if a lot of record is less than a conventional lot,
Chuck, can I ask your opinion on this?
and greater than a quarter acre, the dimensional requirements shall meet those for a conventional lot. Say that twice. Is that right?
I mean, you could say, if it's quarter acre, then you could say, for any lot greater than a quarter acre, you have to have the setbacks for a conventional subdivision.
Okay.
And for any lot that's a quarter acre or below, you have to have the setbacks for the conservation subdivisions.
Can we ask staff administratively, would that be easier to administer?
Well, what goes on right now, as it is, most of what I deal with, people making a request is turned down because of the way it says it is right now. They don't get what you guys are talking about doing because with it set up like it is now, it's a calling in and they say, can I divide a lot? And most of the time it's no, because of the way it's set up now. You go start monkeying around with it, it's gonna make it that much more difficult to try to decide. You're not gonna have that many lots that you're dealing with in the first place with what you're all talking about.
Right,
right now, we're talking about the setback.
right.
Small lot of record.
What I'm saying just takes out the math. You know, it just says,
What you're saying,
this or
Charlie, is
below,
You're
you
saying
get
there would
this,
be no
this or
ratio.
above, you get
again,
this.
it removes any ambiguity.
Right.
Here's the formula.
Yeah, there's no ratio to apply. You get
Okay.
this, or you get that.
Yeah, but for
Let's
lots,
stay to Boyd's point with the setbacks on lots of record that are less than half an acre or less than a quarter of an acre.
Well, there can be so few less than.
I agree, so you want to focus on half an acre or less?
Your reductions were for anything less than a half an acre. So you just state that, you have less than a half an acre, you can get a reduced setback. But if you jump straight to those conservation setback numbers that might be, again, personally, I would say if you have a lot, an existing lot of record, less than a half an acre, here's how the setbacks can be reduced, provided that in no instance can they, the rear setback doesn't change. Rear setback not changing on conservation does complicate it.
So are we safer to go back to Charlie's point and say, here's the number? Administratively, are we easier to stay on that one metric?
Yeah,
I,
think so.
we're talking about it today. Staff's got to administer it every day of the week.
right.
So there's two pieces to this dialogue, but I like what you're saying. Here it is. It's inside the box. That seems like it would be easier on a day-to-day basis to manage and adhere to. If it's under a half an acre, it's X.
Well, tell me how close this got.
So
For
you
lot,
can even do three, you could say from a half an acre, or from a quarter acre and below, it's this, quarter acre to a half an acre, it's this, half an acre and above, it's this. If you want to make it like
I
more.
like that even better because I think it makes it administratively, is staff going to have an easier time taking care of that day in and day out?
Oh, yeah,
If you guys are in agreement with that concept, you obviously gotta come back on this. You have a problem with us just sitting down and working through this and coming up with what we think is the best option for you guys to consider.
well, this is what I wrote. For lots greater than a quarter acre and less than a half acre, setback shall meet the requirements of a conservation lot as defined in section 6030202 of the zoning regulations. For lots equal to or greater than a half acre, but less than an acre, the ratio of the lot size in square feet shall be determined. The same ratio will be used to determine the setbacks for the small lot of record.
That's a half an acre and above?
Yeah,
Mm,
but then you're still.
No,
letting-
you're, that's.
You still have the ratio.
No, I thought we were going back to
No.
the conventional.
Ditch
Makes it
the
more
ratio.
right,
I'd
that's,
get rid of
that's
all
giving
the
a
ratios,
reduction
just
that
go straight to
didn't
the
exist.
Half an acre or greater,
Yeah.
it's,
Conventional.
they have conventional, there's no ifs, ands, or buts.
All
I
right,
would like that, I would like to hear what staff comes up with, Boyd, truthfully.
Yeah.
And especially to Charlie's point, if you do quarter or less, quarter to half, half and above, we know what half and above is gonna be. But we'd love to hear,
And that's exactly the discussion Chuck and I had this afternoon about needing to understand and make sure we apply what we do, what y'all do properly. So that helps to ensure that it's workable in the field. And we'll have to take the time to do that.
okay? Thank you.
all right, with that being the case, going back to bullet number 4, 6030202, the dimensional regulations for minor subdivisions as shown shall be used for applying section 817 to determine required setbacks for existing small lots of record. I think if you lay out all of those bands for what applies to the table, I don't think you need that sentence at all.
No, you don't need that at
You
all.
don't.
No, we're, yeah.
All right. So you need to make that deletion to both the minor sub reference above the table and sentence 6030203. It doesn't show up in 614. So small lots of record are getting they're getting a slightly worse deal down to a half acre, and then they potentially get a slightly better deal, right?
There's no change down
There's
to a
no
half
change
acre.
in half an acre.
There's no
There'll be
change
a
at
slightly
half.
different deal from a half acre to a quarter acre.
Well, a half acre got a 23-foot, and now it's gonna be a 20-foot. So they
A
actually,
half acre wouldn't change.
Half acre doesn't
Change.
change. And half an acre or above, it's only half an acre to a quarter down. It's half an acre, let that piece go.
yeah, but half and above used to get, well, actually it didn't, because we had an old
No,
table with a
that's right.
half acre in it.
Half acre was the minimum.
Yeah,
so it
that's
didn't-
right.
It didn't qualify.
Okay.
Anything above a half acre didn't qualify for that.
Okay. Well,
Half an
everybody,
acre and under, Mr. Chairman.
well, we seem fairly convinced of our path ahead. That's pretty good, huh?
Good stuff.
All right. So what, well, that addresses all of the topics then?
So for further notes, we'll wait for staff and recommendations in October, is that?
And what we'll generally do is take this, and I'll get with Garrett, and generally when we do an ordinance like this, we will strike as inclusively as possible, strike the whole thing, and replace it with this. So when you look at it, you're seeing what it's gonna look like in that ordinance. So we'll compile this in that map. And if there's separation between sections, we may actually do separate ordinances so that we make sure that it's very clear how that ordinance is gonna be in its entirety.
Hmm.
And we'll try to compile that ahead of that meeting. We get a good clean look at what that language will be. On these matters, and on 8/17.
Is a month enough time?
I think
So we'll discuss it October 7th.
we will make that our target, and if we see that that's an issue, we'll let you know.
Yes, sir.
Chuck, is there any other clarifications dimensionally that are difficult to execute now that are relevant to this conversation we could discuss?
I'll bring it up for the next.
So you got some, but you're not quite ready to give them to us. All right. Okay, fair enough. Well, that's kind. All right, yeah, is there any, I don't guess we have a agenda item for any further discussion? We tend to allow, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The only thing that I'm kind of wondering was a point Boyd made early on. And when we kind of came up with this, this approach in the last meeting, I thought, this is great. We can put it into the cutouts, carve-out, and we had the ability for somebody to go demonstrate a need to BZA if necessary. But the point that Boyd made was, it's going to be tough in reality to demonstrate hardship. And then the comment was made, well, the developers are going to feel like, okay, you're just saying forevermore then 1 acre minimum lot size for development of this in here, okay? And say you got some developer who buys up a whole bunch of land, has a whole bunch of land, and he says, I want to develop a subdivision and I want everything to be 3/4 of an acre. And I'm going to build this grand and glorious place, but we would say, nope, it says minimum 1 acre, and there's no hardship because you can choose to make it 1 acre instead of 3/4 acre. Is that what we want? Is that what we were intending? To say forevermore 1 acre?
I want that.
And he still has a mechanism to design a conservation and make them 3/4 acre instead
Take
of
it to
a
the
quarter.
BZA.
But, and as long as you can take it to BZA, I felt comfortable, but I was hearing a little bit of early dialogue, kind of like, well, in
No,
reality,
that's
you're
what
not.
they're, no, that's a good point. That's what their purpose is there for, is that if
Yeah.
it doesn't fit inside the box.
As
take it to
long as
the-
you can do that, then I
Yeah,
think this is
there-
the right thing. We can make the right thing happen for the city.
There's always going to be a mechanism to create some type of request to vary from the norm. So yeah,
Okay.
that's the BZA's point. But if we're at that quarter to half up, and then 1 acre going forward, yeah, I think they've got that mechanism.
And I sympathize completely that this is a real risk from a development standpoint that we're taking by being so, it really is a constrictive sort of position to take.
Yeah.
But
No,
I believe that it was,
There's 26 parcels that are 5 to 10
Yeah.
acres.
but
So let's not overthink this, that if you look at 26 parcels and let's say there's 110 acres out of that entire, I'm just saying that number,
yeah,
we're really talking about, do you want another 220 homes or do you want another 110? You see where I'm going? So what we're talking about, truthfully, is preservation within normality versus jamming something in.
and we still could change zoning in the future. If someone came with a really compelling argument and there was a way to adopt a situation that wasn't covered well, I mean, there's nothing that prevents someone who owns property here to present to us and say, hey, I really want to accomplish this, but I can't quite get it done. I mean, we can still modify this to allow for certain situations. You don't want to, the apprehension was, we don't want to knee jerk this decision off Georgia in the same way we wouldn't want to knee jerk because a developer could just get just the perfect thing if only we were 9/10 of an acre. But I mean, if it's extra compelling, I mean, that was pretty compelling to me that we've got a pretty big hole
Yeah,
in our
absolutely.
regs that we need
It's
to.
certainly the greater evil.
I
But
feel like
again,
that
to your
today.
point, it's not even for us. If we've got measures, the town comes up with something that we can live with. If it's outside of those norms, let them take it to the BZA,
Mhm.
period.
I'm good with that.
And, but you agree, like, if they were willing to wait a year, they could still come to us
Sure.
and ask for.
But at the same token, I kind of like things that are very black and white.
Mhm.
I'm in sales and I live in the gray. But when it comes to these types of things, the preservation of our community, where we're at, let's create a set of box, or let's create a box. Here's the rules.
This is what's desired.
Yeah, here's
this
where
is
the
what's
rules are, and
desired.
if you want to deviate from it, that's what the BZA is there for.
Hmm.
Talk to town, talk to staff, go to the BZA.
No. That's
Sir?
something just, point earlier. The only changes here were residential estate are removing the two comments about lots of with septic and it just doesn't change any minimum lot sizes for residential estate. That's correct?
I read it only to be that he changed the asterisk because we removed the second one that was a double asterisk note, talking about an infill lot.
Yeah, there were previously 3 asterisks in.
So this doesn't change minimum lot sizes in residential estate. Correct.
Right.
The vast majority of the large tracts of developable land are residential estate, not low density residential zone. So this won't impact potential for large developments. It would just be the
That's a good
areas
point.
of town that are already developed. And I think what we understood we were trying to accomplish, so just wanted to point that out, that if you look at the map, this area out here, with all this pink and these big parcels, that's almost entirely zoned residential estate.
Right.
And it's not affected by this except for those couple of comments.
What do you mean affected by this? Because if I look down at 61407, it looks like the only dimensional impacts residential estate is minimum lot size required for keeping livestock is 3 acres. 2 animals are allowed. For additional livestock, the following is required. And the following shall apply to any private stable or structure used to house livestock and has additional front side, and rear setbacks. And then you immediately go into RTD. So, I mean,
Changing these charts doesn't change minimum lot size in residential estate.
Which is what?
Which is what?
So if
Acre?
you're gonna subdivide residential estate, it would now be an acre. And if you wanted to keep animals on it, it'd have to be 3
That'd
acres.
be 3.
That's, it is.
I mean, that's what I'm reading here. What
There's
else?
no
I
change.
think what he's saying is you could
Okay.
never have done a minor subdivision in a residential estate where it was less than an acre.
Right.
It always had to be an acre.
Yeah, I'm just saying, when we're talking about somebody that's actually gonna do what we typically think of.
Greater than 5 subdivision.
All that land's out there, and this really isn't an issue.
Right.
Right.
So it's reducing the parcels that you're talking about further down. So we're really talking about very few parcels.
We're talking about already developed
Mhm.
areas of town versus,
Which is the area that we're trying to address.
that's,
So this really does address the problems, not overall development.
this doesn't impact that land out
Correct.
Well,
there. Just,
It's just a
Right.
good
not,
point.
not that that's right, wrong, or otherwise, just based on.
It's just a notation, though. It's good.
Just wanted to make sure that
It's a
was
good
clear
point.
that.
but I think, I'm not sure. I think it does. I mean, we remove minor subdivision from this section.
I'm talking about just.
He's talking about a traditional subdivision. If you got 8 acres out there and you want to put in, you're gonna have to have 8 1-acre lots.
But
It's
previ-
not gonna change it.
Yeah, but previously, if you had no new right-of-way, and you took 8 acres and turned it into 5 lots or fewer, it could have been a minor, and they could have been, well, they would have been bigger than the minimum.
I was gonna
but-
say, they would have been bigger than the minimum in that case.
Yeah,
Because they would have all been at 1.6 acres.
that was another thing that I think was kind of confusing in these tables for 603. I should add a bookmark, but it's on the web, so it doesn't work like that.
So Boyd will,
Sorry, he was getting ready to say, let's go home.
I know, yeah.
Well, the minor table in 603 is a half acre, 21,000 square feet. The minor requirement in 614 was an acre. So it really doesn't change anything in RE.
Right.
But I think the table was wrong, right? Unless they actually meant to change the definition of minor for RE. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, the minimum, that's one of the things for residential estates, the minimum lot size was larger out there. And the idea was to maintain the larger tracts. But again, the only point I was making is when you're talking about larger developments, that's likely gonna be in that area of town.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a different zoning district. The changing these lot sizes doesn't impact.
If that's not a typo in this table, that's right. I assumed it was a typo because it's the same formatted table from above, but it's got a different number in the minimum lot size
But it's a different district.
because it's a different district.
So we're in LDR, which is
Low density residential is what we're talking about.
right.
In terms of
Plus-
making those
So
changes.
we're fixing to be in both, but I think, yeah, we're not really affecting anything. Well, good. So we don't have anything to do tonight then past that. I think we got a member of the public here. Do they need to address the commission for any
Anything
reason?
from the public? Thank
No.
you.
All right.
Motion to adjourn?
Yeah, we got a motion to adjourn? Yeah.
Second?
Second.
Thank y'all so